we remind you of a statement from the Lord Leto, which was reported almost 8 episodes ago. I am the only podcast remaining in the Empire.
So I don't know why I don't have more listeners. What are you all listening to even? Honestly, it seems like an easy home run.
The podcasting business is tough, it turns out. Even for a god emperor.
Welcome to Gom Jabbar, your guide to the iconic world of Dune. We'll be exploring the themes, philosophies, and characters found in the sandy depths of this vast universe, from Frank Herbert's groundbreaking novels to the adaptations on film and TV. My name is Leo.
And my name's Abu.
And today on the show, we're continuing our deep dive. God Emperor of Dune. We got
This
3 more
book,
chapters. Oh, this book is so fun. I love it.
It's so fun. Especially on a deep dive reread. I think I've said this before, but I genuinely feel like I'm reading this for the first time again. Because there are whole chapters, basically, where I'm like, I don't remember ever reading this, you know? This was so confusing the first time that I just blanked it from my memory.
I think that happens with some of Frank's books, where he's so aggressive in some ways with the beginnings of his stories that the first few times you read it, you're like, I'm just struggling to even piece together what's happening, let alone keying into some of that detail and that nuance.
Totally.
But I completely agree. I also have talked to people recently, and they're saying, oh, I really like the first 3 books. I don't like book 4 and on. And I'm like, I'm in the middle of book 4 now, and I love it. So it's fun. It's fun to do these deep dives. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take care of our housekeeping. Let's make Shout Out Mapes proud. She's been dead for thousands of years. First up, spoiler warning. And happy to say, as always, no spoilers.
Yes.
We are talking only about the pages we've read thus far, nothing from beyond these chapters.
That is right. And of course, at the top of the show, a huge shout out to our Kwisatz Haderach level patrons. Kay Sakin, Matthew, Good, Gents.
Yes.
You should see the memos we're writing about you two.
Assessment. Still very fucking generous. Good Lord.
Assessment. I love them. They're amazing.
It's a real connection I have with them.
Thank you, gents, so much for your generosity. That's our weird way of saying thank you. But of course, that thank you extends to all of our patrons who help make this show possible.
Indeed. Well, today's episode, let's talk about it. Y'all should know the game plan by now. 4 books into this book club series. We're going to begin with a summary of today's chapters. Then we're going to dive into a couple of takeaways. One big old takeaway today. And then we're going to wrap up with some yummy, yummy spice morsels. So, let's take a quick break. And once we're back, we're going to be right on in on our chapter summaries. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's dive into today's reading. So, chapter 7, our first chapter today, is a transcript of a job interview, basically. Some weird chapters today, to be sure.
Yes.
Chapter 7 is basically a transcript of a conversation between Hui Nori, who we know is Kobat's replacement as the Ixian ambassador to Lord Leto's court, and a gathering of Ixian inquisitors who are grilling her, basically. It's kind of a rude conversation, all things considered.
Super condescending. Yeah.
Super condescending. Like, the inquisitors are challenging her and pushing back on basically everything she's saying.
Yeah.
And they're being extremely condescending about it toward her.
Wow, enlighten us with your unlimited wisdom. And she's like, don't be fucking sassy. We're not being sassy. Typical.
Exactly.
Ixian.
The vibes are definitely off in this interview.
Yeah.
But to Hui Nori's credit, she's not backing down. in the face of this adversity. She, in fact, insists that the Inquisitors are wrong about Leto, and that Leto's behavior is more than this simple, shallow narrative that the Inquisitors are pushing about him just being a tyrant, right? He's a tyrant, so he does tyranny things. Duh.
Right.
Case closed.
Yeah, we fucking cracked that case. Y'all were wondering? We found the answer.
Exactly. She's like, no, maybe let's open up the case again, because there's more to Leto than meets the eye. Here are my theories.
Right.
And they're, of course, being super condescending about it. Now, what's interesting is she's backing up some of her theories.
Yeah.
She says, I think there's more to Leto because he is still an Atreides.
Yeah.
And look back at the thousands of years of House Atreides. What characteristics are key to the people in that house?
Right.
Not just the rulers, but also the retainers and the people that work with and for them. Those ideas don't align with the idea that Leto is just a tyrant, so he does evil things because he's a tyrant. The Atreides have never had tyrant tendencies, or at least as far as Hui knows. And again, she's basing this information on two things, the oral history and the official history, which are terms we've heard mentioned before and are seemingly two of the ways that in Leto's universe, people access their past and know their histories. And we'll talk a little bit more about the oral histories later in the Spice Morsels today.
Indeed.
Now, she also backs up her theories by name-dropping her uncle, basically.
Right.
She's like, hey, Malky, my uncle, had a really close relationship with Leto. And, in fact, he thought really highly of Lord Leto, going so far as to call the God Emperor, quote, the most supremely artful diplomat in the Empire, a master conversationalist and expert in any subject you could name, end quote.
I'm just realizing Leto 2 might be my, interpersonal goals. Are you kidding me? If my friend was, master conversationalist and expert in any subject you can name, good Lord.
Right.
What a lovely thing to say about someone.
Right. The highest of compliments. We'd all love to get that Yelp review.
Yeah, totally.
So Malky clearly thought highly of him. And that, again, doesn't align with this idea that he's a tyrant, right? Why would Malky, fall head over heels for this guy if he was just, an evil tyrant doing evil dictator shit?
Yeah, and I'll also say, Moneo, if Moneo said this kind of nice stuff about him, they might be like, yeah, he's biased. He's Moneo.
Right.
Malky was the Ixian ambassador.
Right.
So, ultimately, the Ixians put him there. Presumably, they had an Inquisitor Council assign him, grill him, be condescending to him. So the fact that he comes away from that oh, no, Leto? Wormy boy? No, he's great. I love him. It's like, okay, yeah, maybe something's off. I don't know that something's off, but maybe something is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's about it, honestly, for this chapter. It's just a bit of a back and forth between Hui and the Inquisitors, with them pushing back and her standing her ground. And at the end of it, she gets the job. So she clearly said something right or behaved in some way that the Inquisitors were looking for. And they're like, okay, you have now been confirmed as the ambassador to Lord Leto's court. And there are a couple of ways we could interpret this chapter, but the one that seems most likely to us is that the Inquisitors seem to be pushing on Hui intentionally and seeing if she'll back down in the face of adversity, in the face of pushback like this. And she clearly does the right thing by standing her ground, by not telling them what they want to hear, but instead doubling down on her beliefs and reinforcing them. And it's possible to be like, oh, the dumbass Inquisitors don't understand Lord Leto. They are clearly oblivious to the bigger picture here. Hui is seeing the light, et cetera, et cetera. That is one way to interpret it, but I actually don't think that's true. I think the Inquisitors are smart enough to realize there is more to Leto than we understand. They understand what they don't understand, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And they are smart enough to be like, we may be onto something, and it's useful to put her in the court and fill in the gaps on our knowledge through Hui Nori. And she is strong-willed enough to deal with someone like Lord Leto, if she can put up with us being assholes to her in this interview.
Yeah.
So that interpretation does give this chapter and the Inquisitors a bit more depth than sort of your top line view of they're idiots.
Yeah, which was my first read. I was like, God, these Inquisitors are fucking dumb.
Yeah.
And then the more I thought about it, I was like, no, this is great because it's really them challenging her, finding out if she has a breaking point. And if she does, she's not fit for the job. But she doesn't back down up to the point where she ends the chapter like, well, I'm sorry for wasting your time, as she gets up to leave. And they're like, no, you got the job. And that moment is so cool. It's such a fun little like, you didn't waste her time. You're the perfect candidate.
Right.
Why were you an asshole to me the whole time?
Well, sticking with Dune themes, this is a job interview by Amtal.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, hate when that happens. You walk into a job interview, you hope for a casual conversation. They're like, we're going to try to find your breaking point to understand the true nature of you.
Here's your Chris knife. Prepare for battle.
Amtal and Conley. All right. Ceremonial death battle. Right. Let's do it. Well, with chapter 7 out of the way, let's talk about chapter 8. We are back at the familiar passage. Moneo's on his way to the worm. I feel like this is becoming a pattern. It's always Moneo like, here we go again. But this time, he's coming in from a sudden bout of rain on his way to meeting with Leto, which, again, this little details of how much Arrakis has changed. Details about, we have literal bouts of rain, just sudden tropical bouts of rain. And it was at the edge of the Sarir, the remaining desert, which is also notable.
Right.
Now, Moneo is, and looks, insanely tired. He's just like a sleepy, tired man. I think we've all been there, probably, as we go through our daily lives.
Right.
And honestly, folks, at the spry, young age of 117 years old, you got to give him some credit. I know, he's up and about. I'm 32, and my knees make noise when I stand up. So the fact that Moneo is in the teens of his hundreds, pretty good.
Yeah.
And he's busy. He's busy planning a ceremonial processional journey to the festival city of On. And apparently there's a lot of moving pieces. It's just a lot of logistics.
I can imagine.
Party planning is not one of my fortes, but I get Moneo's probably pretty good at it.
Yeah.
Now, as Moneo approaches Leto, finally he's changed into dry clothes. He doesn't want to upset Leto because he knows that water is, in fact, something that is triggering for Leto.
Right.
As he approaches Leto notes to himself, fuck, Moneo's so tired looking. He looks rough.
Yeah.
But he is almost certainly holding on to his position and staying employed and not retiring or not, leaving Leto's service because he wants to see his one and only daughter, Siona, put into a position of stability. He wants to see her as the captain of the fish guards, and once she's there, he'll retire, die.
Right,
Leto's like, oh yeah, he longs for death. I was like, is this how managers think about their employees?
Right.
Probably.
Once he finishes this budget report, he'll be free to die.
He'll be free to have his heart stop. Yeah, totally fine. Now, their conversation, Moneo and Leto's conversation, begins on the topic of the shiny new Duncan Idaho 14 Pro Max. And Moneo's not super keen on the idea of Duncan and Siona hooking up. He's like, I know that's the plan. Duncan's you use him for your breeding program, but it's my daughter, dude. It's a little weird.
Right.
For her to bang him. I don't know. It's kind of strange. And he also comments, and this is fucking crazy. He comments, Moneo mentions, that every Duncan Gola that's delivered, Duncan Idaho, who was one of the greatest fighters in the universe in 10,191 AG at the time of Dune, every Duncan Gola is, quote, slower and less alert than anyone in your guard, end quote.
Wow.
So Leto's fish speakers and his Imperial Guard are faster and more alert than every Duncan Idaho that has ever been. Is insane. Also, anyone in the guard. There's not like the lowest performer.
Wow.
Like,
That's shocking.
I don't know. David, the Imperial Guard member, is like just barely passing, and even he's
right.
faster and more alert than Duncan.
Even the C's get degrees people
Yeah.
in the fish speakers are better than Duncan, Idaho.
Yeah.
Incredible. It's an incredible metric, and it puts in context how far we've come from Dune, from the first book.
Yeah, and that's what Leto's been doing. He's had 3,000 years of exclusive breeding control. And this is the power of that. He's very much taking after the Bene Gesserit in recognizing the potency of this sort of plan.
Yeah.
Well, nevertheless, Leto's made a lot of progress with his breeding. It's insane. And Moneo, in this conversation, Leto mentions, is on the cusp of a realization about Leto's plans and Leto's sort of deeper motivations. But he's not quite there. He's so close. And he keeps saying things, and Leto's like, do you understand? So he finally decides, I'm going to test Monet. I'm going to ask him some questions. And he refers to himself using the key word as he refers to it. He refers to himself as the Predator.
Mm.
And this is such a poignant moment, especially after all these book club series, thinking about human versus animal and humanity, capital H, and all of these ideas of Amtal and the natural world, but also humanity as it stands apart from that, and all of it. The idea of Leto being like, oh, I'm a predator, and in a way, humanity is my prey.
Yeah.
Is a very fascinating little moment. And Moneo's caught off guard by this word. He's like, but what do you mean? I don't understand. And Leto explains, listen, quote, the predator improves the stock, end quote. Which is a very Amtal explanation of that evolutionary play, that race between predators and prey, right?
Right.
We have these sort of like evolutionary arms races where that one evolves over 1,000 years, graspy claws, so that one evolves a hard shell, and
right,
you know, that sort of thing. Leto's saying, no, I'm a predator, and I'm aiming to improve the stock of humanity.
Right. And think back to that one journal entry from Leto last episode where he says, allies make us weaker, enemies make us stronger.
Yes.
Predators make the prey stronger because to survive, you must adapt.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's adaptability, it's response, it's alertness. When you think about prey, it's the animals that have the ability to be cognizant of their space that end up being fine.
Yeah. And in the context of Leto and the Empire and this story, Leto is the predator that is imposing his quote-unquote peace, his autocratic rule upon all of humanity.
Right.
And if humanity wants to survive, aka beyond the golden path, they have to adapt.
Right.
And of course, Leto's sort of playing both sides of the coin here. He is both the predator oppressing humanity, but also secretly teaching and breeding and pulling the strings on the side to help humanity along in that adaptation.
Yeah.
He's playing a critical role in humanity's survival here.
Well, Moneo completely misses all of this. He's like, I don't understand. He even thinks for a second, he's like, is the worm, capital T, capital W, here? Like, am I in danger? Did I fuck up and not leave soon enough? Is he like twitching? Is he in his like predator state? And no, Leto is trying and failing to get Moneo to understand. Even after he explains that he wants, quote, a humankind which can make truly long-term decisions, end quote. And there's a brief conversation about how much time eternity really is. And Moneo's like, well, I'm sure you and I have a different perspective on that because you've lived for thousands of years. And Leto's like, no, I am a blip in the grand scheme of things. Like, you have no clue how small even I am. And Moneo's like, not you, God. And he's like, yeah, me. So it's such an interesting conversation because Leto's not worried about the next 3,000 years. He's not worried about the next 20,000 years. He's looking at the golden path, which might extend millions of years or billions of years with a B.
Yeah. And this is an idea we even talked about back in Messiah. Paul himself was having these thoughts about, on the scale of eternity, what even is my empire?
Right.
On the scale of eternity, everything is a blip.
Great point.
Everything you think is infinitely powerful and will always be there won't.
Yeah.
That's the reality of thinking on that scale. And both Paul and now Leto too are thinking on that scale.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Now, their conversation pivots a little bit to Siona, but I see some interesting through lines here, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
Moneo is desperately afraid as her parent in regards to, like, her maybe dying. He's like, wait, she almost got eaten by wolves? When? Like 2 nights ago? What the fuck? Like, just like, she wasn't, though. It's fine.
It's chill, bro.
Just her 10 friends were. I was like, what the fuck, dude? You didn't tell me? But Leto's like, come on, trust in her strength. Like, you understand all of what I'm up to. You understand my breeding program. You understand. Moneo clearly understands the fish speakers and their physical capabilities compared to the best fighter in the Imperium 3,000 years ago. Trusts that I know what I'm doing, and trust in your daughter and her strength. We don't know what this test that's coming up is. You know, they're talking about testing Siona. When are you going to test her? He says soon, probably. We don't know what the test is. We get, quote, others have survived the test, end quote. Which if I was going into a test and people are like, yeah, no, others have lived through this.
Yeah.
I'd be like, not most. Not even like a majority of others.
Statistically, where would you say?
Are we talking 3 of 10 survived? 1 of 10? 2 of 10, others, plural.
Right.
Okay, that sucks. So we don't know what the test is, but her death is a real possibility. And I get major flashbacks to Jessica leaving Paul alone with Moheim, right?
Yeah.
Others have tried. They've tried and died. Here's your chance. Jessica had to leave the room and recite the Litany of Fear. Worst quote in Dune. I don't even believe that, but maybe I'll just... That's my new ongoing joke. If you hear me say it, it started here. So yeah, very major through line. Flashback to that. Leto remembers that moment as if it were his own moment, which is also interesting to think about. But he also reflects on Moneo's concern for his offspring. And he's like, that is exactly how I feel about humanity. And it's hard for me that he can't begin to fathom that. Quote, can he not see that all of humankind is my only child? End quote.
Wow. What a quote.
What a quote. So much better than Fear's the Mind
Killer.
Yeah. No, it is. Joking aside, it's a really beautiful quote. And it's so interesting. And this is what I wanted to bring up earlier. It's so interesting to think about this in juxtaposition to Leto as predator, human as his prey, humanity as his prey, right? He's saying, I am the predator and humanity is my prey. And he's also saying, I am the only parent of humanity. Humanity is my child.
Yep.
I also couldn't help but notice he said all of humankind is his only child, meaning he's not counting himself within humankind even remotely anymore. He is now outside of that classification, which
interesting.
Is also interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's telling, of course, because we know about his transformation mentally, emotionally, and obviously physically over these last 3,000 years. Yeah, this quote gave me chills when I read it. And we've talked about it, but yeah, he's playing both sides of the coin, predator and parent, to all of humanity. He is teaching humanity the ultimate lesson, and in order to do so, he has to play both sides of the field. And Moneo is having a tough time grasping the whole picture here, right? He understands parts of Leto's plan. He's the major domo. He's maybe the closest advisor that Leto has.
Right.
So of course he sees the inner workings of much of Leto's plans, but he can't zoom out to a galactic scale, to a infinite scale that Leto is working on. That is hard for Moneo to grasp in this conversation.
Which is a shame, because Moneo does seem, by all accounts, to be insanely intelligent.
Totally.
So we can also see this as representative of, this isn't a failure of specifically Moneo.
No.
If you see Moneo as representative of the best and brightest of all of humanity, we see him directly with access to Leto's personal explanations, directly not being able to understand and comprehend.
Right.
So, in other words, all of humanity has no way of understanding what Leto's doing.
Absolutely.
Hence, we have the Ixians who are like, what the fuck is he up to?
Right.
Hui, please, try your best.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reinforces the God part of the God Emperor, right?
Right.
We cannot know what God's plans are because they are so incomprehensible to us, lowly humans. Leto's in that position.
Yeah. And even when you have the priest being like, oh, Father, explain to me. And he's like,
right.
Don't you understand?
Yeah, exactly.
I explained it on my podcast.
Did you not subscribe?
I thought you listened. And Monet's like, oh, I was busy. I didn't get to listen to this week's episode. I'm sorry. I'm still a patron subscriber.
Right.
Well, Monet has another test ahead of him, kind of, because we learn that after Siona's test, she's going to be introduced to Duncan.
Right.
Every father's worst nightmare. She's going to be introduced to the hot idiot from 3,000 years ago.
Yep. Damn.
And Leto's like, she's going to love him. Oh my God, are you kidding me? She's going to fall head over heels. Moneo, he's hot. Moneo, he's so hot. You can't even fucking, he's hot. Have you seen him? Moneo's like, I've seen so many of him.
Right.
Leto. And he's like, but really, look, his shoulders are so wide.
It's so funny. It's such a funny moment of this chapter.
The conversation is actually funny.
Yeah.
We have this little exchange. Quote, no doubt you have noted that his genotype is remarkably attractive to females.
That has been my observation, Lord.
There's something about those gently observant eyes, those strong features, and that black goat hair, which positively melts the female psyche. I like the idea that Leto, like, shuffles away to his little room, and he's just got, like, pictures of Duncan with, like, hearts. There's something about his gentle, sweet eyes.
Right.
And his strong, strong hands. When I was like, do you need...
The parts of his journals we didn't uncover was all the poetry he wrote about Duncan, Idaho.
I love him so much. He's great. If I had a body, I would want that one.
Yeah.
This
Hilarious.
also officially makes canon the fact that you have to be attracted to Duncan, Idaho. He is mathematically attractive. So
indisputable.
Yeah. If you dispute it, you're wrong. Well, the chapter wraps up as they discuss Duncan's upcoming meeting with Leto, which Moneo has, busy man, already completed all of the preparations for.
Amazing.
Charcuterie board is built. The flagons of ale assembled. The mood music, the mood lighting, glow globes, 50% brightness. Yeah. Sensual.
Yeah.
Sensual meeting.
Just how Leto likes his first meetings with the Duncans.
Indeed. Leto's like, all 20 yards of me is very excited. Meters, whatever his length is. Anyway.
Incredible.
Moneo, clearly busy, and thus wraps up our chapter.
Yeah. Alrighty. Chapter 9.
Yeah.
Oh boy. This is a weird one, folks.
Yeah.
So chapter 9 is our last chapter in today's reading. And it's tough to even call this a chapter because what it really is just a dense series of assessments from the Bene Gesserit Chapter House archives.
Right.
It is a giant memo, basically.
Yeah.
And this chapter is just so jam-packed with information and lore that instead of trying to summarize it here in the chapter summary section of today's episode, we are going to talk about it in the takeaways and actually spend our entire takeaway time going piece by piece through this memo and through the information and the lore that we get from the Bene Gesserit reports all throughout, because we get some incredible insights into the current state of the Imperium 3,000 plus years after the last book, and into the current sort of socio-political relationships of this empire.
Yeah.
So it's really eye-opening stuff. And instead of trying to summarize it, we are going to dive deep in our upcoming takeaways. But before we dive in,
right,
let's take a breather. let's compose ourselves. Let's get ready to read this memo from our manager.
Yeah.
With a quick break. But don't go anywhere, folks, because when we come back, we're diving in. We'll see you in a minute.
Welcome back, everybody. We hope you enjoyed your break. Maybe you took some time to think about Duncan, Idaho, canonically hot body. Let's talk about our takeaways. And it begins on a dark note. We learn that Leto murdered 9 historians brutally, in kind of a poetically beautiful way, over 1,000 years ago. Bene Gesserit's sisters, Chenua and Taswoko, have confirmed the manner of death of these historians, which apparently aligns with rumors at the time. So there were some dark rumors around, oh my God, did you hear? But they didn't have any confirmation of this. In talking to Leto, he's like, oh yeah, I totally did that. Quote, the sisters report that the 9 were rendered unconscious, then burned on pyres of their own published works. End quote. And in a handwritten account from the Majordomo at the time, we learned that Leto said of the deaths, he was like, oh, those 9 guys I burned on a pile of their own work? Quote, they were destroyed because they lied pretentiously.
Shit.
End quote. I love that. Lying. It's not the lying. It's the being pretentious about it. Are you kidding me? Ugh. God. It's so cringe. I'm going to kill them. I'm going to kill them, burning them on a pile of their lies. And all of this kind of indicates to me that probably within Leto's Imperium, history, not a fun genre, not a fun kind of topic to go back
Goodreads
and research.
Very quietly took history off of the genres.
We're gonna quietly remove that from our homepage. How 9 died? Wow. Burned on top of their books? Okay, that's not a genre anymore. Let's just say for all of our safety.
All joking aside, it is a very shocking and poignant thing for Leto to do. To be these people wrote false accounts of history and then doubled down on them pretentiously, and I won't abide by that. That is no longer allowed in my Imperium. If you write a history that is not true, or if you are boastful and overconfident about it, even though you know it's not true, you will suffer the consequences. And Leto, being the ultimate historian who can fact check everything, would obviously have this view. He would read biographies and written works out there and be like, Jesus, the inaccuracies in this are too much for me to bear.
Yeah. He shit-talked biographies earlier, right? In one of the journal excerpts, he was like, the fucking idea that you could even begin to summarize someone's life in a biography.
Right. So this is very in line with what we know Leto's views are. The shocking part of it is simply the manner in which he went about punishing these historians. It wasn't a slap on the wrist.
Also because I get the impression he has a very good finger on the pulse of what are people talking about and what rumors are so I almost see this as he did it in that showy way, right? He takes this lesson from his dad who carries the hand in his purse with this is the hand of God. He's like, I can use stuff like that. It's very theatrical. Yeah. But it also becomes then myth making, and it becomes part of the cultural recounting of the times. So he's the ultimate historian, the ultimate myth builder, and the ultimate storyteller, and all of those things because he has to be.
Absolutely. All right. So after we learn about these historians and what actually happened to them, now that has been fact checked and all the rumors were true, everything you've heard about me is true. We're also told about a conversation that Leto and Sister Chenua had in one of the trips to the city On at a previous festival. And after that, the assessment begins in full. Then we start getting into these little sections that are reports on various things that the Bene Gesserit are interested in the Empire, are keeping tabs on. and also just sort of general updates on the current state of humanity and the Imperium. So let's go through section by section through these and talk about them and what we learn.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the first section is the fish speakers, a term we've now heard many times in these first 9 chapters. And this assessment says that each planetary garrison of fish speakers have elected their representatives to attend this upcoming decennial festival that everyone is planning for. So through this, we can gather, okay, fish speakers work for Leto. We already knew that, but he has bases on every single planet in the Imperium. And they're all sending their representatives for the festival. We're also told that no adult males will be attending this festival as usual. So this is an all-female gathering of all-female fish speakers. Someone check on Duncan, Idaho. Is he still breathing?
Yeah. Also, no adult males, so they'll bring their kids.
Yeah,
that's kind of fun. Or like there might be kid
That's
attendees.
cute. Yeah, I'm
That's
sure
cool.
it's a festival, right? There's got to be carnival rides for the kids or something. Cotton candy.
There has to be legally. You call it a festival, you
Right.
got to have carnival rides and
Absolutely.
cotton candy.
So I assume Leto is holding on to those human traditions for sure. Now, this report also makes clear that the Bene Gesserit are keeping tabs on the male consorts of the higher ranking officers within the fish speakers. So this is interesting because it gives us a little context for how the fish speakers perhaps work. We've always known an Imperium and a Dune in which the dukes, the barons, the emperors have concubines, right? Bene Gesserit concubines,
Right.
like Lady Jessica.
Right. Marriage is political, but like breeding and children.
Totally. And now we see here in Leto's Empire, there's a bit of a table flip. And it is the all-female fish speakers who have their male consorts. And the Bene Gesserit, as they are wont to do, are keeping tabs on them. In particular, they are tracking the genealogical history of these male consorts. And the report talks about how they can't really figure out where Duncan, Idaho fits into all of this because there's only 2 consorts that have Idaho genes. And what does that mean? Is that random? Is that on purpose?
Right.
The Bene Gesserit are still investigating that, but they're keeping an eye on it.
Right.
We also learned that the Bene Gesserit have, for some time now, been secretly trying to form an alliance with the fish speakers, and it's just not working. Like, full stop. The fish speakers are not responding to any emails. The Bene Gesserit are getting ghosted on these Tinder dates. And the report wraps up with a couple more quick details on the fish speakers. It says that Leto has actually slowly been deprioritizing the military function of the fish speakers, which has had, quote, the expected result of increasing local admiration and respect and gratitude for the presence of fish speaker garrisons, end quote. So
interesting.
Presumably they're less a military force and secret police, which we know Leto is against, right? Leto is like, rebellions happen, don't use force against it. That's stupid. He is using the fish speakers presumably more in support roles, in medical roles, in helping and integrating within their community roles, like these softer functions where they still, let's not sugarcoat it, clearly work for Leto and push forward his systems, but in a way in which the populace are like happy that they're there, which is more nefarious than like, I'm going to point a gun at you and hold a gun to your head and make you believe in Leto too. Here's food on your table and you can come to the fish speakers if you're sick and we'll give you some Tums.
Yeah, I do see in some of his verbiage when he talks about Siona, he talks about this potential for her being sort of the thing that he's been sort of aiming for. And he talks about the end of his time, and he talks about going back to being worms, and he talks about these things that may happen and we don't know much about them yet. I think about if he were gone, what would happen to the garrisons of fish speakers on all the planets? And if they're not ingrained in the communities, if they're not appreciated and part of those communities in a way that is more wholesome and more holistic, and not just as like military presence, but also as like pieces of like community safety and things like that. That is a longer term solution of saying these fish speaker women are accepted and respected within their communities. If he's gone, that works, and they can continue to remain in those communities, and that's fine. Versus if they are militaristic, like the loaded gun held to the hostage Imperium, then when he's gone, when the central organizing thing is gone, then that's going to be revolts and bloodshed and chaos and violence, and these people who he's bred and invested in may die or have to kill humanity, and humanity's his child. So I also see all of this as like maybe his prep work as he is shifting, and this actually pivots us into talking about the priesthood, right? Because actually the priesthood assessment is super brief. Basically not a lot has changed. They don't have a lot of autonomous power, and the priests always have to check with Leto if they want to get anything done. But as an editorial, Reverend Mother Sayaxa suggests the fish speaker's famous religiosity is being intentionally, albeit slowly, devolved. So we're seeing two patterns. They are, over the generations, becoming less religiously fanatic and becoming more holistically incorporated into the communities that they're stationed near. All of which sounds to me like a long-term plan.
A humanity that makes long-term plans?
That's the thing. That's the thing he said. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's fascinating because I don't think I even picked up on that the first couple of times I read this, but it's there. It's in the text. I also can't stop thinking about like Leto's carnival, and there's like a merry-go-round, but instead of like horses, and it's just all worms. And you don't sit on them, you stand and you hold the two hook handles.
That's adorable.
And I'm like, right? Wouldn't that be fucking fun? Like a merry-go-round, but you stand on the back of worms that are rotating and you hold onto the maker hooks.
Wow.
And it's just,
that's adorable.
That'd be so cool.
Hey, little Ezra, grab the hooks, buddy. It's about to start. Hold it tight. Hold it tight.
Hold it tight. We're going into on-tall mode, and then it spins really quick. Only the real Fremen kids hold on. But hey, listen, because it's a carnival, you know, and you kind of simulate these things. You have padding all around. So when you get flung, or a ball pit, fun. It's a sandy ball pit.
Only minor
so
bruises
get thrown
and
off of. As is appropriate for all ball pits. You need some danger in the ball pit, you know? So they get flung off of this worm into the ball pit, and then the last one who remains gets a knife.
Only the ultimate predator of humanity could come up with that carnival ride. Brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the breeding program, Abu?
All right, let's talk about this next report. The breeding program.
Yeah.
So this is also another very brief report, but it does hint at some frustrations that the Bene Gesserit are harboring against Leto and Leto's breeding program.
Sure.
The report notes that Leto's breeding program seems random, like it's still very much a puzzle. Even all of these years later, all of these thousands of years later, the Bene Gesserit don't understand what Leto's doing with his breeding program. It seems random sometimes, it seems planned sometimes, there's wild attributes introduced for no reason, seemingly. And it's hard for them to trust anything that Leto even tells them about the breeding program on the rare occasions he does talk to them. Earlier in the report, there was that conversation with Sister Chenua, where he admonishes the Bene Gesserit. Hey, you breeded for tens of thousands of years towards a single goal. That was real stupid of you. I'm not doing that. And they're just like, is he just playing mind games? Is he lying to us? He's lied to us in the past, or does he actually mean it? He mentioned Siona. What could that mean? It's all still very fuzzy for the Bene Gesserit is sort of the gist.
Right.
Now, the report also says that Leto prohibits the Bene Gesserit from participating in his breeding program. They are not allowed to have their own, and they are not allowed to participate in his. They're completely cut off from a thing that has literally defined them since their inception, basically, since the Bene Gesserit existed. And through basically like desperate measures, they have been able to, at the very least, maintain their Reverend Mothers.
Yeah, the number of full
Yes.
Reverend Mothers is
Right.
the same, but not
Yes.
easily. It's not like it's not been the same ease. I also imagine if we think about 3,000 years, you could have anticipated an inflation in that number, and instead they've kind of kept
Right.
consistent.
Some might say stagnant. Has the number stayed?
Stagnant. Has the number stayed? True is the thing you've said.
So this report wraps up with some absolutely brutal details.
I fucking love this.
The report says that when we have questioned Leto about why we are not allowed to play in the sandlot with him to participate in the breeding program, Leto responded, quote, "Be thankful for what you have," end quote.
Period.
That was the text, the entire text.
Yeah.
Cold, stone cold.
That's
and
insane.
what makes it even funnier is the response the Bene Gesserit sent back. The report says that the Bene Gesserit sent, quote, "a gracious letter of thankfulness," end quote. A tough look for our girls in the sisterhood.
Yeah, it's hard trying to plan your way around the God Emperor himself. Well, that carries us to our assessment of economics. So the Bene Gesserit offer their assessment on the order's economic well-being, and they're above board. Yeah, they're still in the black. They're positive in their funds. Their coffers haven't run dry yet. They will be doubling their charges for educational services, which is wild.
Damn.
You know, universities like, by the way, tuition's twice as much now. That sucks. Quote, "We expect to double the fees for the schooling of Great House females across the next 4 reporting periods. You are hereby charged to begin preparing your arguments in defense of this action."
That last sentence.
End quote.
That last sentence got me so good.
It's so grounded in what, I don't know, I feel what it feels like to be a Bene Gesserit receiving this memo. Like you've got time to prepare how to defend this decision that we're making, and being like, oh fuck, I'm gonna have so many complaints. I'm gonna this is a nightmare, and I have to come up with oh god.
And I think anyone who's ever worked in a service field, in a customer facing service field, knows exactly what this message feels like. When corporate overlords change a policy or make a decision, you know it's going to piss people off, and it's your job to deal with those pissed off people the next day. Like, if you've worked in any service industry, you know exactly how this feels.
Dude, I worked retail when New York instituted that 5 cent per bag
goodness
thing. And again, it's like, okay, you finish the transaction and they're like, "Can I have a bag?" And it's like, I asked earlier, you didn't want one. And you say, "Yes, you can. It's 5 cents." And the look you get from people. And it's like, bro, it's the fucking city. There's news in the paper. Don't give me shit about it. I don't
give
give
the paper boy not come to your door this morning?
Paul didn't come to the door. Well, so they're going to be doubling tuition, right? They're doubling schools, tuitions at the great houses. Sucks, but whatever. They do what they can. They're also going to be cutting back on the use of melange in ceremonies. Just anytime we don't need it, let's not, because we need it for creating Reverend Mothers.
It's a general tightening of the belt to keep the budget in line.
Yes. Right. And I think they're also planning for hardship. They're being very conservative with what their economic plan is going to be years out, right? They're talking about the next 4 reporting periods. This is really, it's like, we're not in trouble and we're going to do this so that we're not in trouble in 4 periods. And they have petitioned Leto for more spice. They're like, please, more spice, please. Leto's response, quote, "The Lord Leto has denied our petition for an increase in our melange allotment. No reason was given." End quote. "Can we please have some more spice?" No.
No follow-up text.
Okay. All right. We graciously thank you for your time.
Incredible.
Now, we do find out that Chom is still around, and the Bene Gesserit have had a recent profit surge thanks to their relationship to them. Apparently they like bought in like a profit share thing with them, and it turned out. So they were like, hey, that's great. We have all this buffer. And that buffer, as we find out, offset their losses on Giedi Prime, which is really interesting because it's a tiny aside. They're like, oh yeah, it offsets our losses on Giedi. And it's like, what loss? Oh shit, the cult that older Duncan was telling Leto about, that was a Bene Gesserit backed thing that they were like invested in finding the Harkonnen spice hoard. It seems like Leto found it or hid it, or maybe they didn't find it, whatever. They didn't find it. They wasted a bunch of money. That's so interesting. I love these assessments because between like you are charged to prepare your arguments in defense of this action, and between these little things, I really feel like the Bene Gesserit's a real organization dealing with real, here's expenses, here's profits, it just feels very flushed out in a way that didn't need to happen, but I very much appreciate it, and I think this is something that Frank does quite well.
Absolutely. It's a weird chapter, but it's certainly a chapter where you're like, oh, this feels like a real thing. I was about to say it's the best kind of world building, but I think that's kind of a subjective take. It is my favorite kind of world building, where it's like so overly detailed and weird. And you're like, yeah, this feels like a thing that exists in this universe, and I understand it. All right, let's move on to the next report in this assessment.
Yep.
This report talks about the great houses, and we get some truly shocking statistics in this little section.
Mm-hmm.
Quote, 31 former great houses suffered economic disaster in this reporting period. Only 6 managed to maintain house minor status. End quote.
That's wild.
It's insane.
That's insane.
And you're like, wow, that's unprecedented and weird. It's not. This is super common, actually. This has been happening for the past 1,000 years. Great houses have been falling by the wayside. And the report goes on to clarify that the thing that really helped those 6 that barely survived and are at least still houses minor was their heavy investments in Chom. Those investments helped them survive. The one exception, that was 5 of the 6. There was one, the 6th guy, who decided to diversify his portfolio. So the 6th house had a very diverse portfolio, quote, including a substantial investment in antique whale fur from Kaladin, end quote. So those are the things that helped these houses survive. 31 of them had disastrous outcomes. 6 of them, because of their heavy investments in things like Chom, or in that one case, whale fur, means they're still around for a little bit. And hilariously, this report ends with a parenthetical at the end, sort of a note from the Bene Gesserit writing it. And she observes that the Bene Gesserit's Ponji rice reserves were doubled at the expense of their whale fur holdings in the last reporting period. And maybe it's time we fucking figure out how to not do that. It's hilarious. Like, the subtext of this parenthetical at the end is like, who made the dumbass decision to not invest in whale fur? Because it saved this house, and we should be doing the same.
Yeah.
Again, we're seeing these like weird inner workings of this massive organization and the thinking behind some of their decisions for things that are as seemingly innocuous as their investments.
Yeah, it's very true. And it's sort of the GameStop hindsight. They're like, how could have we known that fucking whale fur prices were going to the moon? We could not have. And you just accept that.
But it does put it in perspective. Like, I imagine the Landstride at this point is either a skeleton body that does nothing, or simply doesn't exist anymore, because who cares?
Right.
The great houses are like dropping like flies. I think that's sort of the big takeaway of this report.
Very interesting, and agreed. I should have gotten into that whale fur stock when I had the chance. Oh, well. Well, let's talk, as we continue this assessment breakdown, let's talk about family life. just next little
Yes.
section. This is also very brief, but basically this assessment talks about the 2,000 years of homogenization of family life within Leto's empire. Now, the only exceptions to this homogenization is the usual power players in the Imperium. And we all know who we're talking about. It's the Spacing
Right.
Guild, it's the Tleilaxu, the Bene Gesserit, the Fish Speakers, and the Royal Courtiers. Now, this report notes that the changes in family life are happening all across all planets equally, which is a phenomenon that it literally just cannot statistically
Right.
be accidental. This is no fluke. This has
Yep.
to be deliberate. Quote, "We are seeing here the emergence of a portion of the Lord Leto's grand design. Even the poorest families are well fed, yes, but the circumstances of daily life grow increasingly static." End quote. And there we have our key little term that we've been keeping an eye out for since the first book. Stagnation. Oh my gosh. I mean, again, Leto told us on the Dune with his father back in Children of Dune, he was like, yeah, gonna give them stagnation like they've never seen before. And the Bene Gesserit are like, wow, this is stagnation we've almost never seen before. Good Lord, happening across the board. Seems like it might be part of his plan. But between this and them saying that he has random patterns, quote unquote random patterns of his breeding program, I see this as continuing to demonstrate that no one really has a clue what Leto's up to. And whether it's Moneo, who literally gets to talk to the worm himself, or it's the Bene Gesserit who are sending him requests and he's responding with single word no. And they're like, okay, thank you so much. No one knows what's going on. Whether it's his plan for stagnation and how is that affecting the Imperium, it's the fish speakers and the religious, the priests, everything. He's working on a level that they can't even
completely
comprehend.
I also like sort of the meta commentary taking place in this section in defense of diversity. Diversity is such a diluted word these days, but this is basically Frank and Leto saying this is not how humanity will thrive if everyone looks, thinks, feels, acts the same. Homogenization of all of humanity, especially at this scale that Leto is doing in his empire, is the death of humanity. He's putting humanity through Omtal so they will adapt and survive. And those meta commentaries sort of here is that the adaptation is embracing the diversity and the difference of each of the planets and cultures and religions, and not falling under the rule of a single governing body or god or ideology, et cetera, et cetera. So I did sort of love the meta commentary of this report and just the larger theme of Dune as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's super
so next
cool.
up, we have to talk about transportation and specifically the Spacing Guild within the current empire. This is another short report, but it tells us that the primary forms of travel within the empire at this point have begun to mimic those on Arrakis. Again, speaking of homogenization. And those forms basically only come in three flavors. Either traveling on foot, traveling via ornithopter in the air, or, if you have to go off planet, using a guild transport. Those are your three options to get around. Now, the report does note that Ix is the primary exception to this rule. So I guess the Ixians are like, yeah, but bikes and trains and buses are still cool. We can still use those.
They've got Heelys.
Right.
They've got that band technology of Heelys.
Oh my gosh, the advanced AI of Heelys. Right. But in general, we're continuing this homogenization of culture for all of humanity throughout the empire, and that includes travel in addition to family life. Quote, "We attribute this in part to planetary de-evolution into sedentary and static lifestyles, and partly it is the attempt to copy the pattern of Arrakis." End quote. Again, all of that should be red flags for the reader, right? This is all we should not be doing this. increasingly sedentary and static lifestyles. We're not trying new things. We're not pushing boundaries. We're not Amtal, all of these themes of Dune.
Right.
And then we're also copying the one thing at the center of the universe because that's what the charismatic leader is doing. So we should all copy, etc. It just all is in line with so many of the large themes of Dune that we've talked about time and time again on these book clubs and on every episode of this podcast.
Yeah. Also, the note that Ix is exempt from some of these trends, because we also get a little bit later, we get note that the Bene Gesserit believe that Leto's using computers himself. So we have this sense that he is imposing this homogeny while himself not adhering to it. And he doesn't have to. He's God. But the Ixian royal cart that he uses could be representative of some sort of Ixian transport as well.
Totally. I think it also is in line with your idea earlier about his long-term planning for once he is gone from the universe. He doesn't want humanity to go extinct, right? He's not oppressing them so that they will disappear. He's oppressing them so they'll adapt and survive. Perhaps leaving Ix alone and allowing them to tamper is him leaving the door cracked just a little bit so that humanity has a way out.
Making sure there's a sharper image available for when everyone's allowed to buy technology again. You want a pen that doubles as a, Bluetooth speaker? Sharper image. It's only $75. Yes. So the assessment continues and actually then touches on the God Emperor himself. Hey, Leto 2. So the assessment talks about that he is still growing. He is large and he is getting larger, but is otherwise physically unchanged. Is still a worm. Is still a large worm. There is a small note about his rumored aversion to water, but they have not been able to confirm this yet, which is funny because this follows the chapter where Moneo's like, he hates water. Water's like super, he hates it. It's awful. So it's funny to see here the disparity of who knows what. And clearly the Bene Gesserit's like, we've heard rumors, but we can't confirm it. I don't know. Maybe the oral history is referring back to water as a controlling factor for sandworms back in the day, and he is now a worm, but we can't connect the dots fully with evidence yet. Now, the report, as I mentioned a little bit ago, makes a claim that Leto's almost certainly using computers, which is a pretty bold assertion, but they have reason to believe that they are accurate in that. Technology that has been long banned and that Leto doesn't allow anybody else to have, basically. And this would be a huge boon for the Bene Gesserit if they can prove it. If they have evidence that he's using computers, that would be leverage that they can use to maybe get more spice or get him to let them participate in the breeding program or whatever they want the most at that moment. But there's a caveat here, because as much as they're going to keep investigating and they're going to try to find this evidence, they believe and understand him to be prescient. And I say it that way because, of course, we know he's not really using his prescience that much. He's relying on spy networks and bribes to get the information he needs. But they don't know that. Everyone's like, we're not really sure what his powers are, but we know that he's prescient. He can see the future. So, to be safe, they are operating within the confines of the knowledge that he knows everything. Which just has to be the most stressful fucking thing in the world. We get this little quote, "We guide ourselves, therefore, by the rule that we will not knowingly threaten either his person or such of his grand plan as we can discern." End quote. Even in that little sentence, they're not like, that he tells us. No, he's not going to tell us shit. We have to attempt to discern his grand plan, and we will not knowingly threaten him or that plan, is the base work of it. So we will discover whether or not he's using computers, but explicitly so that we can help him with his grand plan or help him however we can. It's really interesting. It's sort of that, how do you beat a mind reader, or how do you beat someone who can see the future? And it's well, just plan on helping them, I guess. Plan on joining them. If you can't beat them, join them. That's your plan. So then if he knows what you're doing, he can decide whether or not to help you or stop you or whatever, but it's not malicious, and he's not going to burn you on a pile
Right.
of your past
Right.
works.
Hopefully.
Fingers crossed.
If you tread lightly. Yeah. I mean, this makes me think to the chapter from last episode with Siona and the rebels and them debating, well, he knows everything, so he wanted you to find the journals. Like, this is all part of his plan. You're an idiot. You know, you're just doing what he wants you to.
Right.
How do you fight someone who is all-knowing? How do you rebel against someone who is prescient and knows all of the moves you'll make before you make them? It is fascinating that all of these forces have to deal with this fact that the God Emperor is prescient and may know everything they're about to do. So how do you act within that? And it's something that Siona and the rebels have to contend with and work around, and it's something the Bene Gesserit clearly for thousands of years have been playing around with. Like they're very much fenced in. It's a walled garden, and they can only sort of toy with whatever's in the walled garden. If they step out of line, here come the pyres.
Well, so here's the thing, right? And this is, I think, one of the key things about this book so far. Leto has described himself as a predator for humanity. And we are seeing how impossible it is for humanity right now to fight back or escape a predator who has prescience. And so we don't know what Leto's trying to do with this breeding program. He's making wild choices, wild changes. Moneo talks about random mutations, and Leto says we're not going to talk about that. But he's like, he might suspect what I have accomplished in Siona and Siona as someone who fades out of prescient view sometimes.
There's a lot there.
And it's fascinating to think about that. The predator improves the prey stock, that sort of idea. Well, okay, so Leto's prescient. He's a prescient predator. How does humanity survive against a prescient predator? And the answer to that is the golden
Find
path.
your way out of my prescient box that I fenced you into. And Siona is flickering in and out of it. Ooh.
Yeah.
God damn this book.
Good thing she didn't get eaten by those fucking wolves.
I mean, her 10 friends did. Did we mention that? They're dead.
Yeah, they were slow.
Straight up killed.
They were slow. Except for that one guy. Fucking killed some wolves. Bit the wolf in the neck. I can't remember his name, but I love him.
All right, let's wrap up today's takeaway and this assessment with our final couple of reports here. There are a bunch of little quick reports on the Ixians, the Museum Fremen, and the Tleilaxu. When it comes to the Ixians, there is not much to the report. It basically notes that Hui Nori is the new ambassador that is being sent to Leto's court.
Quuteg. His name is Quuteg. Anyway, just so that you don't fucking email me. Quuteg. Anyway, Hui Nori, as you were.
No, we needed that fact check for sure. So Hui Nori is the new ambassador being sent to Leto's court.
Yes.
The Bene Gesserit believe that Hui Nori may have specifically been bred for this job as ambassador. That might be her entire purpose. And that may not be dissimilar to her uncle Malky, who perhaps also was bred for exactly the job of Ixian ambassador to Lord Leto. But this is another thing that the Bene Gesserit have to continue investigating because they can't confirm these rumors just yet. When it comes to the Museum Fremen, the Bene Gesserit report notes that they are actually a key source of intel of the goings-on Arrakis. And the tone of this report makes it clear that they really hate that. Quote, these degenerate relics of the once proud warriors continue to function as our major source of reliable information about affairs on Arrakis. They represent a major budget item for our next reporting period because their demands for payment are increasing, and we dare not antagonize them. End quote. Amazing.
Unbelievable. Also, little sparkles of Bronzo, the Vix, saying degenerate Fremen scum. Some parallels there.
So this assessment wraps up with one final report on those filthy, fucking Tleilaxu. And
Yeah.
this report
Ugh,
is
gross.
dripping with nearly as much sass as the one on the museum Fremen. Quote,
Yeah.
a recent envoy from Tleilaxu renewed their attempts to entice us into a joint venture, the avowed purpose being the production of a totally female society without the need for males. For all the obvious reasons, including our distrust of everything Tleilaxu, we responded with our usual polite negative. End quote.
No, thank you. No, we're good. We don't need to buy any. We're fine. Play like so like we're not selling cookies. No,
Right,
we're good.
right.
We don't want we're
I
good.
don't have any cash on me. Sorry.
I don't have any cash. Yeah. Yep. That's
Exactly.
kind of
That's the tone of this
here.
report. They don't trust the Tleilaxu, and they are certainly not about to cut any deals with them, especially not deals that involve killing half the populace, I guess. So the Bene Gesserit are going to find other ways that don't involve the Tleilaxu.
Although, does kind of align with a Bene Gesserit splinter group we talked about in the history episode.
That's
they
right.
Suggested the same thing. I wonder if the Tleilaxu know that.
Interesting. So that's our takeaway today. One giant takeaway that breaks down this assessment. A lot of real interesting tidbits of lore and world building and insights into not only the Bene Gesserit and their inner workings and their budgets, but also
yeah.
Leto and the Imperium and the socio-political and economic status of where we are in the universe right now under Leto's rule. Super fascinating stuff.
Yeah. This is from a little earlier, but we talked about the Bene Gesserit attempting to kind of work their way into an allegiance with fish speakers. And we talked at the end of last episode about Nayla and her history.
Right.
And how Leto sent her to Wallach 9, the Bene Gesserit planet, to be attempted to be broken for 15 years. So it's fun to see whether it's this for all the obvious reasons where the Bene Gesserit know that an all-female society is not necessarily the answer. They know that from things that we learn about in the Dune Encyclopedia, but also learning about Nayla's mother's life and Nayla's life from the Dune Encyclopedia. It's fun to see all of this stuff sort of continuing to build on our understanding of Dune history.
Yeah, love it.
Well, we have some spice morsels. The oven's timer is at, well, it looks like just about 65, 60. Oh, it's almost, it's ready. But we have to let stand. We have to let stand for a minute.
Period.
Again, you don't want to burn your little mouth on those hot morsel goodness. So we're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We got a couple of big old morsels for you. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, folks. Hope you're hungry, because we got a plate of morsels for you.
Yeah.
Morsel number 1 today is the oral history. Now, of course, this is a term that has been referenced a number of times in the book so far. And through context clues, we can sort of infer what it is. But thankfully, the Dune Encyclopedia goes the extra mile, as always, and gives us some extra context for what people mean when they talk about the oral history. So the Dune Encyclopedia defines the oral history as, quote, the totality of information about the reigns of the Atreides before the discovery of the Imperial Library on Arrakis, end quote. Okay. That's a pretty vague definition. And if the historian in you is like, that's a little shady, is that reliable information? What are we talking about? Is it a book? Is it a history? Is it a recording? What are we talking about? Great instincts, because it's kind of all of those and none of those. It is a very loose source of information. There's not one quote unquote oral history that everyone is referencing. It's basically a collection of knowledge and traditions passed down through generations via word of mouth or text or even hearsay. So it's not something you can go and fact check. It is just the knowledge that has been passed down. Hence the very fitting name, oral traditions. Now, the Dune Encyclopedia gives us an example of this collection of children's verses that was published long ago in 10,330 AG, 3,000 years ago, that obviously refers to Paul's defeat of Shaddam in the first book. Here's a bit of how that verse goes. Quote, Paul, Paul, came through the wall. Adam Shaddam had a foil. All his Hawets, all his men, couldn't lift him up again. End quote.
That's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. A cute little verse.
A cute little rhyme for the kids, so they know how Paul kicked Shaddam's ass.
Wasn't Humpty Dumpty canon?
Dune?
In real life? Like the Humpty Dumpty limerick is about a cannon that falls off of a wall and then couldn't be reassembled.
I don't know if that's true, but...
Oh, well. That's real world lore.
We're not experts on real world lore.
It's a real...
To only talk to us about
real world
Dune.
morsel.
So to take this a step further, actually, the Dune Encyclopedia goes on to explain that in the time of the encyclopedia, which is far after the books, the encyclopedia is quote-unquote an in-universe document written by historians long after the events of all the books. When historians in that time use the term oral history, what they're actually referring to is not the oral history that Siona, Moneo, and the people of God Emperor of Dune are talking about. They're actually referring to an actual historical text called the Studies in Atreidean History, which didn't begin publishing until 13,850 AG, which is after the events of this book. Now, this massive collection of Atreidean history both verified and reprinted much of the knowledge from the oral histories, such as this collection of children's verses. This was one of the first things printed in the studies of Atreidean history. But, of course, verify is the key word there. It also unearthed a lot of contradictions and inaccuracies that exist within the oral history of Siona's time. And, of course, there's going to be some subtle manipulation from Leto himself to shape that oral history and those traditions that are passed down into his empire. So the sort of big takeaway of this morsel is that the oral histories are this not super reliable, but pretty comprehensive collection of knowledge that's been passed down during Leto's reign. And it isn't verified until after the events of this book, until after Leto's reign, by future historians who go through and study Atreidean history and either correct or call out the inaccuracies of the oral history itself.
Yeah, I think also the oral history as a category is important as it is opposed to that official history of Leto's official story. Granted, if we consider the oral history colloquially as all passed down information that is not the official history, that includes the 9 historians who were burned on a pile of their of their lies. So you can sense, like you're saying, that Leto is manipulating, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly, the shape of the oral history to more or less align with what he needs people to understand about the past.
Totally.
Yeah, super interesting stuff. As a quick aside, I did look it up. There is no agreed upon etymology for Humpty Dumpty, but there was a canon that was commonly referred to. And it was just military historians talk about a cannon that fell off a wall in a specific siege. And but then also it was a nickname in the 15th century for people who were on the larger side. And then there was a king who was dethroned because he was a little hunchbacked. And they were like, yeah, Humpty Dumpty. Anyway.
Wow.
It's a mess.
Real world lore is just as messy as Dune lore. Who knew?
Yeah. It's because Brian wrote half of it. So, our second morsel today is weather satellites. Weather. So, Moneo's chapter today kicks off with this little tidbit that we thought would be kind of fun to explore a little further. Quote, in the warm season, when the satellite weather controllers were forced to contend with winds across the great seas, evening often saw rainfall at the edges of the Sarir. End quote. So, this mention of the satellite weather controllers was interesting to me, kind of piqued my interest. And as always, the Dune Encyclopedia gives us some additional context around these satellites, although for once, it's not like 27 pages. In this case, it's just a few paragraphs. Now, to be clear, weather satellites have been used on Dune since about the time of Paul's reign. Paul took the imperial throne from the Carino Empire and used basically weather satellites to aid in the transformation of Arrakis. He wanted to kind of speed up that process as much as possible. But these that we're talking about are actually very different than the ones that were used back then. Now, the Dune Encyclopedia tells us that early satellites were designed and intended to help speed up the ecological transformation of Arrakis. And I imagine Paul being like, what was that, 400 years? Fucking hold my spice beer. I'm getting this done in 70 or whatever, you know? So they had them sped up with these satellites. These satellites that Leto 2 has installed are actually drying out the Sarir. Their whole point is to maintain the aridness, the desertness of the Sarir. Now, he ordered these from the Ixians at some point following the year 10,402 AG. So this is, again, about 3,000 years ago. Quite a while ago. He ordered these satellites, which the Dune Encyclopedia, and this is sad, actually marks that year, 10,402, as the last sighting of a sandworm.
Wow.
And even that one was in its death throes. It was like the last sandworm, basically. So for thousands of years, they haven't been around. And the satellites that he ordered, quote, these were intended to bring back some of that lost ferocity, to preserve one small piece of Arrakis, the Sarir, in as close to its original form as possible, end quote. So it's interesting. We learn that the sandworms are gone, and that Arrakis, the Arrakis that we have known for all this time, is now all wet. The great seas, the wind coming off of the great seas, the open oceans of Arrakis. We remember how soul-stirring and paradigm-shifting it was for Fedaykin in Paul's army to see ocean, and how much that changed them. Othaim's house had ocean tiles because he was so marked by that experience. And now Arrakis itself has oceans. It's insane. It's wild. So that desert planet is gone, and the Sarir is this patch of desert. We've heard about it. It's Leto's little patch of desert, but it is only being maintained because of these satellites that have been installed for the last few thousand years. Now, as a final little bit of flavor to this morsel, it's that little nugget of seasoning that you kind of encounter in the eating process sometimes. Our logo for Gom Jabbar, our podcast. If you're listening on your phone, you can look at your phone. Our podcast logo, it's a fun little tidbit. I've heard a couple of theories about what the background art is. I don't know if we've ever talked about it, but the left side of the picture is Arrakis in its desert form, the worm, proudly jumping out of the sand. The right side of it is also Arrakis. Post-transformation, open waters, green, lush, living, beautiful. So, just as a fun fact, I've heard theories that it's like the desert Arrakis and Caladan on the right, or Horus on the right. We talked about, when we were designing the logo, we talked about the Gom Jabbar, this needle, as Amtal, defining life and death and the barrier between it. Life being green in Arrakis, and then death being the desert on the left. But then both of them are Arrakis, and in fact, the right side has no worms. The worms have died off, so it's a false equivalency. Anyway, we're nerds. We talked way too much about our logo, but now you get it. Now you get the reference. The Gom Jabbar logo includes Arrakis on both sides.
On both sides of Leto and Paul's rule. The OG Arrakis and the new Arrakis and God Emperor of Dune.
Defined by Amtal, defined by the Gom Jabbar, which separates the humans from the beasts.
Alrighty, that wraps up another incredible book club episode, if I say so myself. If I were to
Sure.
review
So
myself,
you would give this episode 5 stars.
Wow, you made
Yeah.
the exact joke I was going
Yeah.
for. All right, it's time to wrap this up.
Uh-huh.
When we start finishing each other's sentences, that's where we have to cut off the episode. So for next episode, for the next book club, make sure, dear listener, that you have read chapters 10, 11, and 12. And if your copy of the book is different from ours, then read through the chapter that ends on the sentence, quote, "The Duncans always begin that way," end quote. I can only assume this is a sex scene. And
yeah, irresistible. Yeah, same. Tall. Yeah, cool.
So I'm excited to find out what that sentence means in the next episode. But of course, before we let you go, we want to remind you of some ways to support what we do here on Gom Jabbar and to keep in touch with us.
Indeed. Now, the best way, as always, to support us is to become a patron over at patreon.com/GomJabbar. The support of our patrons legitimately, literally makes what we do possible. We could not do this podcast if it didn't support us in some way. It's just too much time, too much work. So we very much appreciate everyone who's become a patron, and we encourage you, if you haven't considered it, consider it. You get some cool benefits, ad-free episodes. You don't have to listen to those 5 or 6 ads an episode. Weekly blooper clips and additional little excerpts. I sense that there will be a few from this episode. And, of course, an invite to our exclusive Discord server where we're chatting and talking about different deep-cut Dune theories and what do you think about this new trailer that just came out, and are y'all excited for this, as well as other tangential, somewhat Dune-related things, other book series. Good conversations about the Expanse.
A lot of Expanse fans
recently.
in our group, for sure.
Yeah. So, very fun community to be a part of. Consider joining us.
That's right.
We'd love it.
And another great way to support the show is to get yourself some Dune-themed merch from our store, GomJabbarShop.com. We have art, we have apparel, we got mugs, we have this cute tote bag with a cute little mouse on it, and so much more. GomJabbarShop.com. Treat yourself and support the show.
We have a decal of the Gom Jabbar logo, which you now understand both sides of and how deep of a cut it is. And the art's fucking beautiful because my dad is incredible.
Indeed.
He's a good artist. So check it out. Yeah. And we love to hear from you. So send us an email. If you've got thoughts about the reading from today's episode, if you have questions, concerns, feedback, if you have things you want to see in the merch store or requests for features for our Patreon, let us know. GomJabbarPodcast@gmail.com is the email to reach us. Send us an email. We're planning on doing a mailbag coming up. So send us your thoughts. Send us what you think. And we'll get back to you in one calendar year. or fast.
And tell us, should we be investing in rare whale fur?
I keep searching for whale fur on NASDAQ, but I just can't find it.
Yeah, someone send us that link to the whale fur stock. I think we should invest.
Or maybe we create a crypto. We create whale fur as a
Kaladin whale fur
crypto. Kaladin.
Wow, that's an idea.
Yeah. NFT.
Well, friends, there is no real ending. It's just the place where you stop the recording. But this podcast is always one step beyond logic, so help spread the word of Muad'Dib and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, whoever controls the podcast controls the universe. We'll see you on the Golden Path.